Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the final preview edition for Pennsylvania Midget Week for the NOS Energy USAC National Midget Tour and Hyper Racing 600 Speedweek presented by 600cc Performance. My name is Chris Graham, and once again, we are joined by Justin Groves of Newsroom. And before we kick things off, we do have to acknowledge the events that took place last night out at Williams Grove Speedway. A push truck driver, Richard Speck of Mechanicsburg, did lose his life in an accident last night. We will be covering this a little bit more in detail today, and we'll also have a bit of an opinion piece video coming up, either as part of the Lowdown and Dirty pre-race show from Lanco, or as a separate video, but you can look for that coming this week also. So, Justin, thank you very much for joining us. Last night was another outstanding night of racing out at Linda's Speedway. We'll start things off on the USAC side. Tyler Courtney was quick for the second night in a row, but it was Tanner Thorson and KTJ that would make up the front row after the invert. What did we see out of the heat races and qualifications last night from Linda's?
Yeah, I think for the most part, we saw kind of what we expected. That it was going to be a little bit tougher to pass earlier on in the night, and especially with the rain threatening. I know that Linda's really had to push it through for the whole night, and they really had plans to kind of let that track slick over, which really helped for the feature. So even though maybe the heat races weren't as exciting as maybe we would have hoped for, we definitely saw that come up in the future really well. I think both of us really had it with time trials with Tyler Courtney getting the pole last night, so I think we both did a pretty good job in that prediction.
Yeah, it's sort of one of those, almost like picking Tommy Koonsman to win at Linda's, which we'll get to in a little bit. Very rarely is that kind of a chalk pick, going to be that far off. But hey, we'll take the credit for making the good selections there. It was a bit of rinse and repeat in the feature as Thorson jumped out to an early lead, and then we saw a great battle develop for second place behind him.
Yeah, I think really what we kind of saw there was, it almost looked like Path Valley all over again with Tanner getting that lead early. And then you could see KTJ really just kind of reel him in a little bit by a little bit. And then unfortunately we saw that probably a lot of why KTJ was reeling Thorson in was because he was developing some kind of mechanical issue, which really isn't the greatest, especially as I'm seeing right now. I think that was the last that we'll see of Tanner on the Eastern swing as he heads out to Knoxville to get ready for the Nationals.
Yeah, they always say that the motors run really, really great before they hand grenade. And I think we saw a little bit of that last night out of Tanner Thorson. Good luck to him out at Knoxville. Nationals Week is always very special, whether you're a 410 fan or not. There is just something about a big racetrack that literally sits right in the middle of Knoxville, Iowa. I mean, you're parking in the grocery store parking lot across the street. So good luck to him out there. As we continue on throughout the race, KTJ and Tyler Courtney battled for a while, but then it came back to a late race restart. And Zeb Wise did the Zeb Wise thing again. It was a whole lot of rinse and repeat from last night.
I was really surprised how well that bottom came in at Linda's. I've run there in a micro and in a midget before, and really it's always just you got to kind of get to the top just because of how much momentum Linda's really carries. But as I just talked about earlier, they really let that track slick up really, really nice, where that track widened up right to the wall where it was almost developing a pretty nice little cushion. And Courtney found that bottom early, which really helped him get around KTJ. And I think Zeb saw that, especially after losing the race at Path Valley, because he just couldn't get his car off the top to run the bottom nearly as well. And just as kind of a flip-flop, Courtney left the bottom to go to the top to try to get around lap traffic, but that top part of the track was just gone, and Zeb stayed to his roots on the bottom, and that really propelled them to the victory last night.
Yeah, really exciting finish. Wise making the pass for the lead with one lap to go. And then it would be Tyler Courtney coming home second, followed by KTJ, Chris Wyndham, Jason McDougall, that top five is still the top five. It seems like we're kind of in a bit of a situation where we're almost thinking, yeah, you're gonna see the same five cars up front. All right, we're looking at the average finishes for the week. Chris Wyndham's at a 2.5, Courtney is at a 3, and Zeb Wise is at a 4.75, which includes an 11th place finish from Grandview after having his accident issues and having to replace a front axle. The next closest driver is Logan Seavey in 5th at a 6.75. So those three Clausen Marshall cars have really separated themselves.
Yeah, and you even saw Andrew Laser have a good run last night in the Clausen cars. Linda's has always been a pretty good track for him. I know he just barely got nipped by Alex Bright to almost get his first USAC ARDC win a few years back, and he was really holding his own in second, holding off KTJ for a while early until he unfortunately spun out and just didn't quite have enough time to really make his way up. But it's still, again, that's another car coming out of the Clausen Marshall stable. And I think, again, McDougall is very aggressive, which may help him a lot tonight at Lanco, but I don't really think you're going to see too many of the other cars outside of the ones that you just mentioned really make some noise tonight at Lanco.
Yeah, I mean, we jokingly called it the Clausen Marshall Racing benefit this week, but these guys obviously put a little bit more time into this maybe than some of the others did, or I don't know if it's taking some of the information maybe from an Andrew Laser who's able to say, hey, I've run this place, we got to be on the bottom here, we got to be on the top here, we got to be ready for this. It does help. Do you think having a local guy like that help when you come into this situation where you only see these places once a year?
I would say so. And a lot of those national teams do rely on some of the local teams for a little bit of feedback. I think my really most eye-opening moment when I ran midgets was when we went to Path Valley for the first time, or really for the USAC National Midgets to ever go there. Keith Coons actually came to me and asked what gear to start with. And I was like, Keith Coons is asking me? I barely even know what gear I have in the car. And then, of course, I told him that, and you could hear at the time, that's when Brian Clausen was driving for him. You can just hear him hitting that rev limiter real hard in practice. So I guess I gave him the wrong gear, but that wasn't intentional. But for the most part, yeah, you have to rely on it. And we even see in the 600 micros, once we get into sprint week, a lot of the local drivers to each track have been the dominant one. So having that advantage is definitely huge if you can provide some level of feedback.
Now, we'll stay in the Clausen Marshall Racing stable here a little bit, but is Zeb Wise the breakout star of Midget Week this week? I mean, we know he picked up a win last year at Lanco, but he hasn't been that consistent top 3, top 5 presence this season. He's running, I think he's 8th or 9th in points at this point. Well, going into the week, he was 8th or 9th in points. Excuse me. Is Zeb Wise that breakout star of Midget Week?
Really, with just how midgets and sprint car drivers go, I think once you finally get something that clicks, you can just click off a stream of either good runs or wins. I think we've seen it a lot in the past with a lot of these young drivers. I know last year Zeb got that win at Lanco, but that was after he had some time off from a broken collarbone. So I think it was a nice win, but he's still kind of getting into the swing of things and just didn't. And then he had kind of a sophomore slump to start the year. But now that he's got those wins under his belt, I mean, at Grandview, he may have even won that race too, since he was supposed to start from the pole, but had to go to a backup car. It's almost really reminding me, and I'm going to save most of this story for a later newsroom story coming up at the end of this week or early next week, but it really is starting to remind me of how Wise beat Larson at Action Track. Is almost looks like it's a passing of the torch, just like when Larson beat Brian Clausen at Lincoln Park a couple of years back, where that really seemed to get Kyle Larson's career jump started.
That is a very interesting call there, because Brian was very young when we lost him, and he was already regarded as one of the best to ever strap into one of these cars. It's a shame we didn't get to see him more out here in Pennsylvania, whether it was for Midget Week or Sprint Week. But do you have a favorite Brian Clausen story? Because that just ties in so nicely with with the Driven to Save Lives program and everything that Clausen Marshall Racing is doing.
Yeah, I've actually known Tim and Brian for a long time, at least just from an acquaintance standpoint, because as Brian was trying to make his way into NASCAR, they were running like a driver development program right as I was growing up as well. But I'd probably just say my favorite moment, I really didn't get to run against him that much, but luckily, right before his untimely passing, I got to actually run against him when he was running one of Hefner's cars for an ARDC race when the Eastern Sprint cars were in town, and I got to run side by side against him in a heat race, and that was just how a lot of the 600 guys felt about running against Kyle Larson on Action Track on Wednesday night. That was kind of like one of the highlights of my career, is just getting a run by Clausen side by side about a month before his passing.
Well, we'll move on. Speaking of those 600s, we saw another really, really good race out of the 600s as well. They did have a bit of a rain delay that they encountered. As a driver, how does that affect you and your preparation when you're kind of mid-show, you're ready to go, you're jacked up, and then shut it down?
From a mental standpoint, it definitely, I think you're just ready to go whenever you need to. Just from running these local tracks, it's not like you have a lot of time to prepare. It's whenever they call you, you got to go, and then that's when you go. I think it's more from just a car setup perspective, because then you have to really rethink, as that track got slicker last night, like how much rain actually got on there. Did the rain fall on the bottom or the top part of the track? Are they going to run the track in at all? Because you get locked in knowing that, like, I got the setup, I know what the setup's supposed to do, and when you start getting a little bit of moisture to the track and trying to figure out what it's going to do to it, I think mentally, from that point of just a driving standpoint, it really throws you off that, like, well, the car's supposed to work on the bottom, but maybe now there's more moisture on the top. Do I try to do that? So I think that's what really throws people off, especially when there's any weather involved.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about it that way, because Damon Paul was the passing point guy again, high passing point guy again. Actually, let me rephrase that. The newsroom high passing point man for the night, for the second evening in a row. That put him on the pole, but as you talked about, the track was different from when he accumulated those passing points up to feature time. And after losing the race on the last lap the night before out of Path Valley, I think there were probably some pretty significant questions over whether he would be able to stay up front. When the green dropped, Paul checked out on the field, left Aaron Bollinger, Jesse Maurer, and Tommy Kunzman to battle for second. And we're going to hear a lot from those names as the race recap rolls on. Really intense battles throughout the field all night. The track really opened up to 2 and 3 wide racing. But Kunzman finally came through that battle to the runner-up spot. And you're wondering if maybe that wasn't going to be the start of something big coming drama-wise. The race went green, I believe, all the way to the finish until the caution with 2 laps to go. So that was very similar to what we saw the night before as well. All in all, it was really one of those where Damon Paul just said, "Look, not tonight, Jack. We're going to hold on to this lead." He pulled away, and he did pick up the win over over Tommy Kunzman, Aaron Bollinger, Jesse Maurer, and Colin White. So our picks, all in all, were pretty good. We did mention Tommy Kunzman. Again, I do have to say it's a little bit of a shock that Tommy Kunzman didn't get the win there, but that may have been as much about format as anything else. I think if you put Kunzman in Damon Paul's position, maybe we're talking about a different winner.
Yeah, when we got that caution with 2 laps to go, it almost seemed like it was just deja vu all over again for Damon Paul. But I don't know. I know we talked about it yesterday about what the format was, but they didn't do a double file restart with 2 laps to go. They did a single file restart. So I don't know if that's a track by track situation, but that definitely helped out Damon, because he was getting just some monstrous launches on those starts, and he made sure he wasn't sleeping at the wheel on that final restart and really put some distance on him. And even there was, I think, one more restart where Kunzman was in second. Even as strong as he's been in there in the past, he really just didn't even have anything for Damon. And he was actually kind of really fighting just to hold up the runner spot as Aaron Bollinger got really strong at the end of the race. I know off the air yesterday we were talking about that we thought Aaron Bollinger was going to be a dark horse as well with Jesse Maurer, and he definitely showed up last night.
Yeah, they're Bollinger and Maurer are two guys who, between Linda's and Lanco, I don't necessarily know you can call them dark horses because they run so well there, but when you look at who's ahead of them in the standings, maybe it is a little bit of a dark horse pick. I mean, Bollinger currently is sitting 7th in average finish for the 600s this week. Maurer's 12th. Outside of the top 5 or 6 guys in the 600 class this week, we're seeing a pretty significant drop off. Alex Bright is the top average finisher. Actually, Bright and Koonsman, they're both at a 3.7 average finish. Colin White and Damon Paul are 3rd at a 4th average finish. And Timmy Buckwalder is 5th at a 4.3. After that, you drop to Brian Carber at 6.3, and then it's Bollinger at a 9th place average finish this week. So what do you think we can expect to see heading into Lanco tonight, knowing how strong those top 5 or 6 cars have been?
For the most part, I think you'll start to see some car count come back up, and where you'll start to see some local drivers come in and really start to potentially mess with some of these guys that have been so successful earlier on in the week. I know yesterday and earlier on in the week we talked about Mike Rutherford will probably throw his hat into the ring starting tonight. I'm trying to think of a few other Lanco and Spirit ringers that are going to come in. So I don't know if you're going to see any drivers outside those 4 or 5 that have been running Speedweek really kind of jump into the mix. The one name that I do think you're going to see probably a lot more of is Kyle Spence. He's really just struggled for these first 3 or 4 nights, even though he did get the hard charger at Path Valley. But as we talked about in our Speedweek preview, he's just not had it on the East Coast. But he's definitely got to turn it around at Lanco and Spirit, tracks that he has so many laps at. Also, Spence won the Speedweek race there last year. So out of those 5 or 6 names of drivers that have run the whole week, he's definitely going to be the one that's going to throw his hat into the ring and be a dominant force for these last 2 nights.
I think that might be one of the neater stories to follow tonight as things develop out at Lanco, is that you have these top 5 or 6 names in points, none of whom are regulars at Lanco. The top one that I see as a regular is Aaron Bollinger in 7th, Jason Swavely in 10th, and then Jesse Maurer in 12th. Then you have guys like Nash Ely, who's currently 14th in average finish. Spence is 15th. Very talented guys, good cars. And then you have names that aren't on that list. You have Rutherford, you have Heath Hanley, you have Jared Kunkel, you have, there's a lot. I mean, even a guy like Zach Light, who's had some issues this season. We're really going to see, this is almost a posse versus the Outlaws situation developing, where you're going to have a lot of good regular Lanco cars that haven't run all week with 600 Speed Week.
Yeah, I don't think I could have a better comparison than that, especially since Lanco mostly runs wing. Those local drivers have had some big wingless wins in the past. Rutherford won over the Memorial Day weekend in wingless and has had plenty of success running wingless at Spirit and Lanco. I know Keith Henley, whether it was last year or 2 years ago, won the Labor Day wingless race. So all of those drivers, even though they're known as wing ringers, do have a lot of wingless success and are really going to challenge these guys, especially these guys are now going on the 4th night in a row. Their equipment's definitely beat up a little bit, and now you have Rutherford and Henley and Kunkel that have had fresh stuff and are really going to pounce on these Speedweek Tour guys.
Yeah, I think I don't want to give too much away here, but Jared Kunkel is the kind of kid who will put it up on the high side and absolutely let it eat. So if there's a night we're having that little bit of a cushion, especially if they get it to develop like they did last year for the Midgets, holy cow, this Jared Kunkel really could be one to watch for tonight. So as we look at the point standings, Alex Bright is your top points man. He's got finishes of 1st, 3rd, and 7th over Speed Weeks. Tommy Kunzman is right there with him as well, finishes a fourth, fifth, and second. Is this a two-horse race going into the final 2 nights of Speedweek, or do we think Lanco is such a wild card that really it's, anybody in that top 10 in points could try to make a run at it?
For the most part, I would say I think it's really going to determine how things come out of it tonight. I'll talk about Alex Bright a little bit later when we go into our predictions. So those top 2 drivers, I think, are going to be the ones to watch. But you still have guys like Colin White and Damon Paul that are sitting pretty there, not too far off the lead. But tonight is definitely going to be a different experience than these last 2 nights. These last 2 nights are big, fast tracks at Path Valley and Linda's. And you really get into some tight confines and some really aggressive driving that happens at Lanco, where you don't really see it nearly as much as the other 2 tracks. So just with Paul and White not having a lot of experience, even though they run Hamlin, which is a smaller, more track that you have to be more aggressive at, I'll be curious to see if they can stay within reins to try to make things interesting going into the last night at Spirit tomorrow.
Looking a little bit down the standings, we see a name, guy Eddie Strada, who was second on night number 1 at Action Track, and then just has not been able to come through the field on 2 nights where the tracks were really pretty racy. What do you think we see out of Fast Eddie, and how does the night for him go tonight, do you think?
I feel pretty bad. I feel like I jinxed him a little bit, because going into night 2, you asked me which one of the top 5 drivers were going to fall off, and unfortunately I picked Eddie, and it unfortunately has pretty much come true these last 2 nights. I think he will bounce back because Lanco plays similar to Action Track of just being aggressive, tight action, and that's where he really thrives at. And I know those MMF cars and limited experience have done pretty well at Lanco. I don't see him winning tonight, but I definitely expect them to be more or less back in the top 10 this evening.
All right, so it is time for us to move into the picks section of things for the evening. Who is going to be your pick for, we'll say, top passing point guy? Who's your prediction for the newsroom passing point leader of the night?
Yeah, I feel like it's actually been more of a newsroom benefit to Damon Paul these last 2 nights. I hope we can get a bigger logo on his car after all the money that we've given him the last 2 evenings. I think it's going to go to Alex Bright. Alex has had a lot of experience at Lanco, just as he has at Linda's, but has also won a lot of big races at Lanco. He kicked off the season with the No Wing Spring Fling race. Even though that was in the Greg Stevens number 20 car, I expect him to have that same success and move through a lot of these cars this evening.
I think our pick for that high point guy for tonight for us is going to be Brian Carver. He's got, let's find the numbers on Mr. Carver here. He's got finishes of 5th, 6th, and 8th. He seems like that kind of guy who Lanco, that fits his style. When the big money is on the line, he does find another gear. I know he hates the nickname Big Money Brian Carver, but it sort of fits. He's very aggressive, and I think some of his equipment is some of the best prepared in the pit area, I should say. So I think that might not be a bad pick for Brian Carver for our high point man of the night. So who's your pick to win tonight then out at Lanco?
I'm going to go right with my passing point champ, Alex Bright, and I'm going to pick him to win tonight. I think it's a really interesting thing that you mentioned Carver. Bright and Carver have put some epic battles on lately. They dueled it out in a video that's had a lot of views online from Southern Illinois last week, where they battled each other for I don't remember if it was for the win or for second, and won the qualifiers at Southern Illinois. And they duked it out at that No Wing Spring Fling, where Bright took the victory. And I think that same result is going to come out tonight. And if Bright can win tonight, I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on anyone that's trying to win that Speedweek championship going into Spirit tomorrow night.
Well, I'm going to completely counter the argument and say we're getting a little bit of home cooking tonight. I think, and I'm really torn over who the pick should be. But I think I'm going to have to go with Mike Rutherford to win this race tonight. And Mike, if you don't show up, you're going to drive me up a wall for this one. But our pick for the night is going to be Mike Rutherford. He's a multi-time track champ at Lanco. As you mentioned earlier in the week, quite possibly more laps than anybody in a more modern version of these micro sprints. There's just too much knowledge base deep in the recesses of his head to not have the setup on point tonight for whatever track conditions that Joe Keppel and the rest of the track crew prep team throw out at the drivers tonight. So Rutherford's our pick to win. Who's your pick for a dark horse?
I ended up kind of copping out in my article yesterday about picking a team, but I'm going to go with a team as the dark horse for tonight of the Michael Fossey driver development team with Christian Bruno and Buddy there. Buddy actually ran really good last night. That was kind of an off night for Christian, but Christian ran really good in the wingless races at that no wing spring fling earlier this year. And Buddy has really picked it up lately. That team with Michael and Brooke Fossey have done really good over the last few weeks, and I expect them to really be in contention. I know they ran Lanco a few weeks ago just to kind of get things dialed in for this show, and I would expect either one of those two drivers to try to be fighting for a top 10, top 5 spot tonight.
I think that's a good pick. I am going to say, come on, man, pick one of the two. But hey, we'll give it to you. My pick for a dark horse tonight, looking over the list, he's currently 14th in average finish numbers, so I don't know that he's that much of a dark horse. If only for the fact that he had some early week issues. He came home 10th last night out at Linda's, and that's going to be Nash Ely. He's a guy who, if we see the top start to go away for the 600s, he really could be one that's going to be able to hook it up down bottom as well. A lot of these guys, they know Lanco, they know it's going to be fast. You're going to be throwing a lot of sliders and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you see a little bit of an issue in track prep, Nash Ely might be the guy who's able to let it eat down bottom. He's passed a ton of cars at Lanco this season. Now, granted, that is with the wings on, but he's due to have his Speedweek turn around a little bit.
Yeah, Nash has been a forgotten force this week. I think his problem is he's just not picking bad enough numbers where he starts up front in the heats and stays there, but then gets buried in the qualifiers where it's a little bit tougher to move around, and it puts him to the middle to back of starting in the A mains, and just really hasn't made a run. But even though he hasn't run Lanco nearly as much as he had in years past, he did have that string of runner-up finishes, so it'll be interesting to watch to see if he can finally turn two of those second place finishes into a victory tonight.
Yeah, now we're also going to turn our attention ahead a little bit because we do have one more night of PA Speedweek, which we will be previewing as well tomorrow, or at least hopefully we're able to preview that one tomorrow. And that was down at Spirit Auto Center Speedway at Bridgeport. It's a big quarter mile, one of the bigger tracks they're going to run this week. Very wide, no guardrail, but you're also really not going to see much of a cushion develop down there either. Matt Smith has kind of owned the place. Mike Rutherford is a prior champ there. We talked about Mike a little bit. Really excited to get down there to see Danny Serrano, Colby Ramey, and the whole crew down at Bridgeport as well.
Yeah, I made it down there 2 weeks ago just to kind of get my eyes on the track, since I probably haven't been there in about six or 7 years since the ARDC Midgets ran there. And Danny Serrano and that crew put together a really nice track, really racy track. And as we talked about with Lanco today, of having their home-cooked guys being in contention to win tonight, Spirit has their own contingency. Even though most of their top drivers have followed this speed week, such as the aforementioned Matt Smith, Luke Thomas, but I also expect to see drivers such as Wayne Scott Jr., and PJ Williams also come into the battle tomorrow night to try to mix things up, as the drivers that have been chasing the Speed Week championship all week have to contend with those guys if they really want to win that championship.
Yeah, we may see over the next 2 nights it really turn into a battle of who finishes the best out of the points contenders and that could play a big role in who wins this championship. Is it's not necessarily going to be who wins, but who has the fewest issues over these next 2 nights.
Yeah, and that's when any of these speed weeks, it's really just about being consistent. I've been surprised how consistent drivers such as Alex Bright, Tommy Koonsman, and Damon Paul have been every single night. So now that we get to the latter half of it with tonight at Lanco and tomorrow at Spirit, I wonder if these drivers can still keep it up for 2 more nights.
Yeah, it's going to be a really exciting night. We'll kind of wrap things up there. Justin, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate all the work you've put into everything this week with Newsroom. For those listening, make sure you check out his website, newsroom.com. That's NEWZVROOM.com. Really, really neat metrics there. A lot of great passing points, numbers, and all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure we'll see that updated at the conclusion of Speedweeks. You will see more from the National Racing Network today, coming up at 4 p.m. We'll be handling the production duties for the Lowdown and Dirty Radio show. We'll have Whippy, the captain, / Noodles, Whitby, the whole crew out there. I'm pretty sure we're going to have Bear out there with us as well. So looking forward to working with those guys this afternoon. And then keep your eyes peeled to the NRN page, because there may be a couple of special announcements coming tonight, both with regards to tonight's racing action at Lanco and also for a couple of big events we have coming up. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will talk to you tomorrow with a review of Lanco and a preview of Spirit Auto Center Speedway. Thanks for joining us, everybody.